The HOA Karen who's been making my life hell for 6 months just called 911 to report me for breaking into my own house. Little does she know, I'm the new sheriff who's about to answer that call. Picture this. 6:30 a.m., I'm on my grandmother's porch fixing a loose shutter when I hear the screech of designer heels on concrete. Brenda Thornfield storms across my yard in full Karen mode, yoga pants, oversized sunglasses, phone death-gripped in her manicured claws. 911! There's an intruder at 1247 Maple Street. He's destroying property with some kind of drill weapon. The morning air smells like fresh coffee and impending justice as she stands there, chest puffed out like a rooster, waiting for my arrest. Then my own patrol car pulls up. Deputy Remy steps out, spots my sheriff's badge, and just shakes his head. Ma'am, you literally just called us. On us. Game, set, match. But let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's house in Willowbrook Estates, one of those gated communities where they'll fine you for breathing too loud. I'm Darren Wolf, 45, former military police turned private security contractor, recently divorced dad to 12-year-old Skylar, who's the light of my life. This house isn't just property, it's sacred ground. My grandmother Ruth raised me here after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. Every weekend, Skylar and I work in Grandma's rose garden, the sweet scent of pink peace roses mixing with the smell of WD-40 from her workshop, where I'm teaching my daughter to build birdhouses. That workshop still has Ruth's coffee mug sitting on the workbench, stained with 30 years of Maxwell House. Willowbrook Estates, 847 homes of suburban perfection, where conformity is king and individuality gets you a violation notice. Monthly HOA fees, $340 that makes my wallet cry, especially on a security contractor's income. But the alternative was apartment living, and Skylar deserved better. Enter Brenda Thornfield, HOA board president for 8 years running because nobody's brave enough to challenge her. Picture a 52-year-old real estate agent who treats our neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. This woman drives a white BMW with custom plates reading HOA Prez and lives in a 500-square-foot monument to Ego on Oak Ridge Circle, complete with a marble fountain that gurgles pretentiously 24/7. Her husband Bradley owns Thornfield Motors and has bought enough city council votes to pave his driveway with gold. Week 2 of homeownership, my first love letter arrives. A violation notice for my non-conforming mailbox color. Ruth's original black metal mailbox, identical to dozens of others, was suddenly an aesthetic violation. Fine, $150, escalating $50 daily. The bureaucratic bullying had begun. Being reasonable, I bought a can of Forest Glen green paint and spent Saturday morning making my mailbox HOA compliant. The chemical smell of fresh paint burned my nostrils as I worked, thinking this would end the harassment. Sweet, naive me. Brenda started conducting daily drive-bys, engine purring like a predator as she photographed my every movement. She'd idle outside my house for 10 minutes each morning, phone pressed to her ear, probably dictating violation reports to herself like some suburban Stalin. Here's what I discovered about HOA boards. They're magnets for two types: genuine community builders and petty tyrants who never got over not being prom queen. Brenda clearly fell into the latter category, wielding her clipboard like Excalibur and her violation notices like royal decrees. The neighborhood itself was telling. Picture-perfect houses with souls crushed out of them. No kids playing in yards. Too risky. No block parties. Might violate noise ordinances. Just the mechanical whir of mandatory landscaping crews and the ominous hum of Brenda's patrol car making rounds like a shark circling wounded fish. My neighbors existed in constant fear. Gladys Remy, a sweet 78-year-old retired teacher, would wave from her prize-winning garden but duck inside if she spotted Brenda approaching. Marcus Rivera, a fellow Marine living 3 houses down, offered silent solidarity with meaningful nods but never risked public conversation. The atmosphere was toxic. Imagine living under a microscope operated by someone who genuinely enjoys finding flaws. But military training teaches patience, observation, and strategic thinking. While Brenda thought she was intimidating me into submission, I was building a case file. Every inconsistent rule enforcement, every neighbor treated differently based on their friendship with her, every time she bent regulations for the inner circle while crushing everyone else. I started noticing things. Why did Bradley's landscaping trucks park overnight without violations while my work vehicle got cited? Why did board meetings always happen during working hours when regular people couldn't attend? Why did the same 3 families always win the Yard of the Month contest? Something stank worse than the chemical fertilizer on those perfect lawns. And it wasn't just Brenda's power trip. Real money was involved. HOA money. But first, she had to escalate this petty war into something federal. And boy, did she deliver. 2 weeks after the mailbox surrender, Brenda launched her real attack. I came home from a 12-hour security shift to find a certified letter superglued to my front door. Classy move. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding immediate removal of my grandmother's picket fence, weathered to beautiful silver gray by 37 Ohio winters. The violation cited architectural inconsistency with evolving community standards. Translation, Brenda needed a bigger win. The legal fee? A cool $450 automatically added to my HOA account for the privilege of receiving their lawyer's threat. 30 days to comply or watch them slap a lien on Ruth's house. That night in the workshop, surrounded by the familiar smell of sawdust and WD-40, I dove into Ruth's meticulous filing system. God bless that woman. She kept every receipt, every permit, every piece of HOA correspondence dating back to 1985. What I found made my military-trained heart sing. The original covenant's grandfather clause protecting all pre-1990 installations. Ruth's fence was installed in 1987, and I had the building permits to prove it. But here's what really got my blood pumping. During my walkthrough documentation, I counted 23 identical picket fences throughout Willowbrook, some newer than mine. Hell, the Hendersons on Elm Street had installed theirs just last year without so much as a sideways glance from the board. From my investigation training, I remembered that selective enforcement in housing contexts creates what lawyers call discriminatory application. Basically, if you don't enforce rules equally, the rules become legally meaningless. One lawsuit from the right attorney could blow holes in half their violation notices. Time for precision strike number 1. I assembled a 30-page evidence packet that would make a Pentagon briefing officer proud. Photos of every comparable fence, building permits, property surveys, and a detailed analysis of the grandfather clause. I even included aerial photos showing how picket fences were part of the neighborhood's original design aesthetic. Then Brenda played her hand and revealed more than she intended. The appeal hearing got scheduled for 2 p.m. Tuesday, smack in the middle of working hours when normal people couldn't attend. Convenient, new policy eliminated remote participation. Oh, and she somehow knew it was the same day as Skylar's school play where she was starring as the lead in Annie. The woman had done her homework on my personal life. That's when I realized this wasn't about fences anymore. I showed up in full military dress uniform, ribbons, decorations, the works. Sometimes you need visual reminders that you're dealing with someone who doesn't fold under pressure. The community center conference room reeked of burnt coffee and nervous sweat as I faced the 5-member firing squad. Mr. Wolf, Brenda began with that politician's smile, while we appreciate your thoroughness, the board has evolved beyond outdated grandfather clauses. I laid out my evidence like presenting intelligence to a commanding officer. Each point built methodically. Grandfather clause legally binding, selective enforcement creating discrimination liability, 23 precedent fences establishing community standard. The crunch of papers turning was the only sound as board members realized they were cornered. That's when Janet Morrison, retired paralegal who usually stayed silent, dropped the bombshell. Actually, Brenda, selective enforcement could expose us to federal fair housing violations. We're looking at potential civil rights lawsuits here. The room's atmosphere shifted like air pressure before a storm. Sandra Wells moved to reverse the violation. Tom Fredericks seconded faster than a gunshot. Even Bradley Thornfield, Brenda's own husband, couldn't bring himself to support her obvious power play. Final vote, 4-1, with Brenda isolated and furious. But here's where things got interesting. As the meeting broke up, I watched Brenda's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Surprise, rage, calculation. Then something that looked almost like excitement. She whispered, "This isn't over," as she passed my chair. But her tone wasn't defeated. It was promising, like someone who'd just been handed an excuse to escalate to the next level. Outside, I pretended to check my phone while watching Brenda through her BMW's window. She was photographing my work truck's plates while talking rapidly into her phone. City council connections, other violations. Make him regret this. That's when it hit me. Winning this fence battle hadn't ended the war. It had just taught Brenda that legal channels wouldn't work. She was already planning her next move, and it wasn't going to be another violation notice. The drive home gave me time to think. Ruth used to say that bullies always escalate when their first tactics fail. They don't retreat, they get meaner. I'd just proven I could fight her on legal grounds, which meant she'd have to get creative. In military terms, I'd force the enemy to adapt their strategy. And adaptive enemies are always more dangerous than predictable ones, especially when they have city council connections and a husband who owns the biggest car dealership in 3 counties. 3 weeks after the fence victory, Brenda dropped her nuclear option. I found the notice taped to every mailbox Thursday morning. A brand new rule banning overnight parking of commercial vehicles in residential driveways, effective immediately, no appeals, no grandfather clause, and conveniently retroactive to preserve neighborhood aesthetics. My security company truck, a basic white Ford with tiny magnetic logos, was suddenly public enemy number 1. First violation, $200. Second, $500. Third, automatic property lien. Game over. But the psychological warfare got personal fast. Skylar's weekend playdates started falling apart because parents couldn't find parking when they dropped kids off. Mysterious orange cones blocked guest spots whenever my daughter had friends over. The message was clear: hurt the dad by isolating the kid. That's when Brenda made her fatal mistake. While researching county ordinances Saturday morning, the sounds of Skylar's laughter floating in from the backyard where she was building a blanket fort with her friend Emma, I stumbled across Ohio Revised Code Section 5312.02. Beautiful legal language that prohibits HOA restrictions on commercial vehicles, unless they're genuinely hazardous or oversized. I'd learned about housing discrimination laws during my ugly divorce, when my ex-wife's attorney tried similar intimidation tactics. Turns out fighting for custody teaches you useful things about residential rights and discriminatory enforcement patterns. So I did what any reasonable person would do, filed a formal complaint with the State Fair Housing Authority. Then I went hunting. My evening walks with Skylar became intelligence-gathering missions. "Daddy, why do you keep taking pictures of trucks?" she asked as we passed the Hendersons' commercial lawn service vehicle parked boldly in their driveway. "Sometimes, baby girl, you have to prove that rules work the same for everyone," I explained, documenting violation number 17 that Brenda somehow missed. The smell of diesel fuel and fresh-cut grass filled the evening air as we cataloged Bradley's massive landscaping trailer, parked permanently in their circular driveway. Same trailer, every night, 0 violations. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Tuesday evening brought the mini twist that revealed Brenda's desperation. I'm supervising a licensed electrician installing a motion sensor security light, fully permitted, all paperwork visible, when city code enforcement rolls up with sirens. Someone reported unpermitted electrical work, Inspector Mike Rodriguez said apologetically, checking my clearly displayed permits. Obviously bogus complaint, but I have to respond. "Any idea who called it in?" I asked innocently. Mike glanced around nervously. "Can't say officially, but the complainant was a female board member whose name rhymes with Glenda Terrible." Here's what Brenda didn't expect. That bogus complaint triggered a paper trail. Code enforcement logs are public record, and false reporting to city officials carries penalties. She'd just handed me documented evidence of harassment. The State Housing Authority moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, I received official confirmation that they'd opened an investigation into discriminatory enforcement practices at Willowbrook Estates. Selective rule application violates federal fair housing laws, especially when targeting working-class residents while exempting politically connected families. I kept this nuclear weapon in my back pocket, continuing to build evidence like assembling an intelligence dossier. Every photographed exemption, every documented double standard, every witness statement from neighbors tired of living under Brenda's arbitrary rule. But the real bombshell arrived Saturday morning in the form of Gladys Remy carrying homemade chocolate chip cookies and a manila envelope that would blow this case wide open. "Darren, I can't watch this anymore," she said, her voice shaking with 30 years of suppressed anger. The sweet smell of warm cookies couldn't mask the bitter scent of long-hidden truth. My husband was an attorney before he passed. He always said bullies count on good people staying silent. Inside that envelope were 5 years of HOA board meeting minutes. Gladys had been recording secretary before Brenda forced her out. What those documents revealed made my military investigation training kick into overdrive. Every major contract awarded to Bradley's companies without competitive bidding. Landscape maintenance, Bradley's crew, $340,000 annually. Snow removal, Bradley's trucks, $85,000 per winter. Parking lot repairs, Bradley's equipment, $120,000 last spring. All rubber-stamped by a board chaired by his own wife. But wait, there's more. "Check the county financial filings," Gladys whispered like we were planning a covert operation. The numbers she reports don't match what she tells us. That Sunday, while Skylar practiced piano in the living room, the gentle melody of Fur Elise providing soundtrack to my investigation, I cross-referenced public HOA financial reports with internal meeting minutes. The discrepancies were staggering. Invoices for work never performed. Phantom tree removals billed at $15,000. Emergency repairs that happened months before the emergencies. Bradley's companies had systematically overbilled the HOA for nearly $900,000 over 3 years. We weren't dealing with petty neighborhood tyranny anymore. This was organized theft from 847 families, orchestrated by a woman who just escalated from harassment to criminal conspiracy. The irony was delicious. Brenda's desperation to destroy me had led Gladys to expose the biggest HOA fraud in county history. In trying to silence one problem neighbor, she'd awakened an entire community of victims. Brenda's next move proved she'd completely lost her damn mind. 3 days after my conversation with Gladys, she called an emergency board meeting to address declining neighborhood standards and problem residents. The notice went to every household except mine. I only found out when Marcus Rivera slipped a copy under my door at midnight with a note scrawled in angry handwriting, "She's trying to railroad you." The meeting agenda read like a declaration of war. Item #3, enhanced scrutiny protocols for residents exhibiting patterns of non-compliance and community disruption. Translation: let's destroy Darren Wolf using official channels. But Brenda wasn't content with bureaucratic warfare anymore. She'd launched a character assassination campaign that would make political operatives jealous. Suddenly, neighbors were hearing whispered stories about my drinking problem, my violent military past, and how my ex-wife fled in terror with our daughter. The lies spread through Willowbrook's social networks like poison in a well. The cruelest cut came when HOA family picnic invitations went out to every household, except ours. Skylar found the bright yellow flyer in her friend Emma's backpack and asked why we weren't invited to the neighborhood party. The smell of barbecue smoke from the community center that Saturday mixed with the scent of her tears as I explained that some adults are just mean. "But why do they hate us, Daddy?" she asked, her 12-year-old heart breaking over grown-up cruelty. "They don't hate us, baby girl. They're scared of people who ask questions." I showed up to that emergency meeting anyway, uninvited, unwelcome, and armed with Gladys's financial bombshells. The community center conference room was packed beyond capacity. 47 neighbors crammed into space meant for 20. The broken air conditioning made the room feel like a sauna, and nervous sweat mixed with competing perfumes created an atmosphere you could taste. Brenda gavelled the meeting to order with theatrical authority, her smile predatory as a shark sensing blood. Tonight, we addressed the cancer threatening our community's property values and peaceful enjoyment. That's when I stood up and dropped my nuclear option. Before we discuss problems, let's talk about the real cancer. $890,000 in fraudulent contracts I've documented over 5 years, I announced, my voice carrying command authority that cut through the murmurs. The room went cemetery quiet. You could hear individual heartbeats and the distant hum of streetlights through windows. I distributed evidence packets like a prosecutor presenting to a grand jury, financial records, meeting minutes, contract analyses that painted an undeniable picture of systematic theft. As neighbors flipped through pages, their faces cycled through confusion, shock, and mounting rage. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, addressing the woman in the front row whose husband worked 2 jobs to afford their monthly assessments. "That $15,000 emergency tree removal last spring, county records show no permits filed, no work performed, and the invoiced address doesn't exist in our neighborhood." Patricia Henderson's face went from confusion to fury as she calculated the money stolen from her family. That's why our fees went up. Then came the mini twist that nobody saw coming. Retired postal worker Jim Kowalski stood up in the back, his weathered hands shaking with anger. "I need to say something about mail tampering," he announced, his voice carrying decades of federal service authority. "I've seen Brenda opening mail that ain't hers, multiple times. Packages, letters, official correspondence. She takes stuff from mailboxes and opens it in her car. Lady, I spent 30 years with the Postal Service, and what you're doing is a federal felony." The temperature in that room dropped 20 degrees as 47 people realized they'd been witnessing federal crimes. But Brenda, cornered and desperate, made the tactical error that would destroy her completely. Instead of denying or deflecting, she doubled down with delusional defiance. As HOA president, I have the authority to inspect suspicious mail deliveries for community security, she declared, her voice rising to near hysteria. Especially when problem residents might be receiving threatening communications or planning disruptive activities. Dead silence. Even her own board members stared at her like she'd confessed to murder. Federal mail tampering isn't an HOA power, it's a crime punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison. Sarah Martinez, the neighborhood CPA, stood up with her own evidence folder. I've been tracking these financial irregularities for months, she said, her accounting expertise lending devastating credibility. This isn't just overcharging, it's systematic embezzlement using RICO conspiracy methods. As the meeting erupted into open revolt, I watched Brenda's carefully constructed kingdom crumble in real time. Neighbors who'd been terrorized into silence for years were finding their voices, sharing stories of intimidation and financial abuse that painted a picture of organized crime masquerading as community governance. Walking home under storm clouds gathering like an omen, I realized this war had just escalated beyond neighborhood politics into federal crime territory. Brenda had confessed to mail tampering in front of 47 witnesses, including a retired postal worker. Time to make some phone calls to Washington. That night, while Skylar slept peacefully upstairs, I spread Gladys's documents across Ruth's old kitchen table, the same table where my grandmother had taught me to balance checkbooks and question authority. What I discovered made my hands shake with rage. The theft was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Bradley's landscaping invoices told a story that would make the mafia blush. $340,000 annually for routine maintenance when neighboring communities paid $95,000 for identical services. Snow removal contracts charging $85,000 per winter in a region that barely sees 12 inches annually. But the kicker that made my military fraud training scream bloody murder? Invoices for phantom work, $22,000 for emergency tree removal on properties that had no trees, $15,000 for specialized drainage consultation in areas with perfect drainage, and my personal favorite, $18,000 for holiday lighting installation during a year when no holiday lights were installed anywhere in the community. The smell of Ruth's lavender sachets still lingered in the table drawers as I cross-referenced these invoices with actual work performed. The mathematical impossibility was staggering. They'd billed for 847 individual lawn treatments every month, which would require a crew of 30 working full-time. Bradley employed exactly 4 part-time landscapers. But the discovery that made my blood turn to ice came from Sarah Martinez's meticulous accounting analysis. She'd traced money flows through shell companies and discovered Bradley hadn't just been stealing from Willowbrook. He'd replicated this scam across 6 HOA communities throughout the county. Total theft, $4.7 million over 7 years, all funneled through his wife's board positions and political connections. The smoking gun was buried in city council meeting minutes that Sarah had somehow obtained. Bradley's $25,000 in political donations to current council members coincided perfectly with zoning variances worth millions for his car dealership expansion. But here's where it got federal. He'd used stolen HOA money to fund those political donations, creating a systematic bribery scheme that would make RICO prosecutors salivate. Then I found the folder that changed everything. Hidden in Ruth's personal papers was a letter she'd written but never sent. A formal complaint to the state attorney general detailing financial irregularities she'd noticed 3 years before her death. My grandmother had been investigating this corruption alone, documenting the same patterns I was now uncovering. Her spidery handwriting filled page after page with questions about inflated contracts and board meeting irregularities. The letter's final paragraph hit me like a physical blow. I fear for what this community will become if good people don't stand up to this corruption. Someone needs to run for office who can't be bought or intimidated. Ruth had died before she could file the complaint, but she'd left me the roadmap to finish what she started. That's when the pieces clicked into place like a weapon being assembled. The current sheriff was retiring after 20 years, and election filing deadline was 13 days away. The position would give me authority to investigate county-wide corruption while protecting families from the kind of systematic theft that had funded Brenda's reign of terror. But the revelation that sealed my decision came from a photo tucked into Ruth's letter. A picture of her at a community meeting in 1995, standing at a podium demanding accountability from local officials. On the back, her handwriting, "Democracy only works when citizens participate." She'd been fighting this fight long before I inherited her house. Now it was my turn to honor her legacy by taking the fight to the next level. As dawn broke over Willowbrook, painting the sky the color of Ruth's roses, I made my decision. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice for every family that had been systematically robbed to fund political corruption. Time to file for sheriff and finish what my grandmother started. The next morning, I transformed Ruth's workshop into a war room that would make Pentagon planners jealous. The familiar smell of sawdust and machine oil mixed with fresh coffee and the ozone scent of electronics as I spread county maps across her old workbench, marking every HOA community where Bradley's tentacles reached. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was systematic corruption that needed precision demolition. My first ally knocked on the workshop door at 0600 sharp. Marcus Rivera, fellow Marine, carrying black coffee and the kind of folder that means serious business. "Heard you're running for sheriff," he said with military directness. "About damn time someone with a spine stepped up. What do you need?" Marcus brought veteran networks that money couldn't buy, retired cops disgusted by political favoritism, firefighters tired of equipment contracts going to campaign donors, and military families who'd watched their tax dollars disappear into connected pockets. His contact list read like a who's who of people fed up with business-as-usual corruption. Next came Gladys Remy, arriving with chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven and institutional memory spanning 4 decades. The sweet smell of vanilla and brown sugar filled the workshop as she settled into Ruth's rocking chair like she'd been appointed campaign grandmother. "I know every skeleton in every closet in this county," she announced with surprising steel in her voice. "More importantly, I know which officials can be trusted and which ones Bradley owns." Gladys became our intelligence asset, mapping political relationships and identifying allies among church groups, senior organizations, and civic clubs. Her network included retired teachers, librarians, and volunteer coordinators who formed the backbone of local democracy. Sarah Martinez showed up with 3 laptops and forensic accounting software that could trace dirty money through shell companies like following blood trails through snow. The clicking of keyboard keys provided soundtrack to her devastating analysis of Bradley's financial empire. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to spreadsheets that revealed the full scope of systematic theft. School district maintenance contracts, county roadwork, municipal landscaping. Bradley's companies have inflated prices across every government entity while using stolen money to fund the politicians who protect him. Here's what I'd learned from fraud investigations during military service. Successful corruption always follows predictable patterns. Criminals get comfortable with methods that work, then repeat them until someone with training recognizes the signatures. Bradley's network showed classic organized crime characteristics. Multiple legitimate businesses used to launder stolen funds, political protection through strategic donations, and intimidation of potential whistleblowers. Sarah's technical analysis revealed what prosecutors call enterprise corruption, when criminal organizations systematically infiltrate legitimate businesses and government contracts. This wasn't petty theft. It was organized crime masquerading as community service. Our legal strategy targeted 3 federal statutes that would destroy Bradley's operation completely. Mail fraud carries 20-year sentences when criminals use postal services to send falsified invoices. Wire fraud triggers federal jurisdiction when stolen money crosses state lines electronically. But the nuclear option was RICO conspiracy, systematic corruption involving multiple organizations that federal prosecutors used to dismantle entire criminal enterprises. The campaign headquarters evolved organically as word spread through networks of frustrated citizens. Dr. James Walsh, whose medical practice had suffered when city contracts went to Bradley's donors, offered professional endorsements. His credibility with educated voters perfectly balanced our blue-collar veteran appeal. Rebecca Torres, investigative journalist whose HOA corruption series had been killed by nervous editors, approached us with renewed determination. "I've been sitting on half this story for months," she said, photographing our evidence boards. "Your documentation provides the missing pieces for Pulitzer-level exposé work." Our media strategy focused on education over sensation. Instead of personal attacks, we explained how corruption affects property values, public safety, and government integrity. Every interview included practical takeaways: how to request public records, warning signs of bid rigging, and legal resources for fighting official retaliation. The opposition research was almost too easy. Current Sheriff's Department appointments read like a roster of political favors, unqualified relatives, campaign donors, and cronies who'd turned law enforcement into another tool for protecting connected criminals. Honest deputies were frustrated by orders to ignore complaints against politically protected suspects. But the discovery that crystallized our mission came from Skylar herself. She was helping organize campaign materials when she found Ruth's old voting guides, carefully marked with research notes about every candidate and issue. "Daddy, why did great-grandma write so many notes about voting?" she asked, her 12-year-old curiosity cutting straight to the heart of democracy. "Because she believed good people have to participate in government or bad people take control," I explained, watching her absorb lessons about civic duty that would shape her entire life. That evening, while Skylar practiced campaign speech delivery in front of Ruth's mirror, I realized this campaign was about more than defeating corruption. It was about modeling for my daughter what standing up for justice looks like, even when it's dangerous. Time to show Bradley's network what happens when they threaten the wrong family's future. 3 weeks into my campaign, Brenda and Bradley declared total war. The attacks came from every direction simultaneously, like a coordinated assault designed to destroy my livelihood, reputation, and family before Election Day could arrive. It started with surgical strikes on my income. Anonymous complaints flooded the state licensing board claiming I'd threatened clients with weapons and violated confidentiality agreements with unstable behavior. Pure fiction, but each complaint triggered mandatory investigations that froze my security contracts while legal fees mounted like compound interest from hell. Then came the digital assassination campaign. Overnight, fake reviews carpet-bombed every platform where my security company existed. Dangerous veteran with PTSD episodes. Threatened my children during routine patrol. Shouldn't be licensed to carry weapons. The lies multiplied faster than bacteria in warm water, accompanied by one-star ratings that obliterated 5 years of honest business building. But the cruelest escalation targeted Skylar directly. My 12-year-old came home from school with tears streaming down her face, carrying playground whispers about her crazy daddy who steals money from neighbors. The smell of her strawberry shampoo mixed with salt tears as I held her on Ruth's old couch, explaining that sometimes good people get attacked for fighting bad people. "But why do they want to hurt us, Daddy?" she asked with heartbreaking innocence. "Because we're threatening their piggy bank, baby girl." The physical intimidation escalated when campaign signs started disappearing within hours of installation, not just removed, destroyed with systematic malice. Wooden stakes snapped like kindling, metal frames twisted into abstract art, printed messages defaced with spray paint that reeked of industrial chemicals and desperation. Marcus Rivera caught them red-handed Tuesday night during a surveillance operation that would make military intelligence proud. Bradley's dealership employees working in coordinated teams, systematically destroying campaign materials using company vehicles. License plates, faces, GPS coordinates, timestamps. Marcus documented everything with precision that would make prosecutors weep with joy. "This isn't vandalism," Marcus reported during our Thursday strategy meeting, the aroma of fresh coffee mixing with righteous anger. "It's organized political suppression using business resources. Federal election interference with RICO conspiracy elements." But here's where Bradley's network made their fatal error and delivered the mini-twist that would destroy them completely. City inspectors suddenly discovered violations at every property belonging to campaign supporters. Gladys Remy got cited for excessive garden decorations that had bloomed unchanged for 15 years. Sarah Martinez received violations for non-conforming mailbox height, measured with equipment that somehow found her mailbox different from identical neighbors. Dr. Walsh faced zoning violations for his home office that had operated legally since Clinton was president. The retaliation was so obvious, so systematically coordinated, that it created a federal civil rights case gift-wrapped with documentary evidence. But the twist that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Skylar's teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Holbrook, requested a private meeting about the harassment situation affecting your daughter's educational environment. "Mr. Wolf, I need you to know that Brenda Thornfield contacted our principal demanding access to Skylar's school records, claiming HOA authority to investigate problem families," she said, her voice shaking with professional outrage. "When we refused, she threatened to have the school district's landscaping contracts reviewed for compliance issues. Federal law protects student privacy, with criminal penalties for unauthorized access attempts. Brenda had just escalated from harassment to felony educational privacy violations while threatening a public institution with retaliation. The surveillance got creepier when the same cars started following us to school and soccer practice. The stench of cigarette smoke and fast food lingered around our house as watchers maintained visual contact with our daily routines. Amateur hour surveillance from people who'd watched too many movies and not enough real counterintelligence operations. I documented every stalker, every license plate, every behavior pattern that proved organized conspiracy. The evidence file grew thicker than a phone book, documenting crimes that carry decades in federal prison. The late-night psychological warfare included dead fish in our mailbox, threatening messages spray-painted on our garage with the same industrial solvent from destroyed campaign signs, and phone calls where nobody spoke but heavy-breathing communicated menace. Classic intimidation tactics that work on civilians but just piss off military veterans with federal law enforcement training. Here's what Bradley's network didn't understand. Every escalation created more evidence for federal prosecutors. Every threat got documented and reported to authorities, building comprehensive cases against their entire criminal enterprise. Every attempt at intimidation strengthened community support for someone willing to fight corruption despite personal costs. The irony was beautiful. They'd spent years using fear to control local politics, but they'd picked a fight with someone whose daughter deserved better than growing up under their corrupt system. As Election Day approached, they were about to learn that intimidating honest citizens carries consequences they'd never imagined. Federal agencies don't negotiate with organized crime. They destroy it. 2 weeks before Election Day, Brenda orchestrated her masterpiece of desperation, a frame-up so elaborate it would have impressed Hollywood screenwriters. What she didn't expect was a 12-year-old with her great-grandmother's sharp eyes and a father with counter-surveillance training. The setup unfolded like a military operation planned by amateurs. Skylar noticed the pattern first during our evening walk. "Daddy, that red Honda has been parked by our mailboxes 3 days straight. The lady inside keeps talking on her phone and pointing at our house." I'd already spotted Brenda's surveillance, but hearing it from my daughter confirmed my suspicions. Time for some tactical preparation. I positioned trail cameras and cell phone recording equipment around the mailbox cluster, creating overlapping coverage that would capture whatever Brenda was planning from multiple angles. Friday evening, 6:47 p.m. sharp, the trap was sprung with theatrical precision. I walked to collect mail while Brenda emerged from her BMW clutching her phone like a director's megaphone. The evening air carried the scent of approaching rain and her overwhelming vanilla perfume as she launched into her Oscar-worthy performance. "Darren Wolf, I'm warning you to stop stalking my family and terrorizing our community," she shrieked with volume designed to carry 3 blocks. "Stay away from us or face the consequences." Instead of taking her bait, I smiled and waved at cameras I knew were recording from multiple locations. "Evening, Brenda!" "Just collecting my mail like any other resident. How's that federal investigation treating you?" Her face cycled through confusion, fury, and dawning panic as she realized I wasn't following her carefully rehearsed script. Meanwhile, her witnesses, obviously coached employees from Bradley's dealership, clustered around the mailboxes like the world's most uncomfortable flash mob. But here's where her plan revealed its fatal flaw and delivered the mini twist that would destroy everything. Brenda's phone, which she thought was recording our confrontation, was actually live streaming to a Facebook group she'd created for neighborhood safety updates. Every word, every coached witness, every staged threat was being broadcast in real time to 847 Willowbrook residents who could see exactly what she was doing. The comment section exploded with outrage from neighbors who'd been silent victims of her tyranny for years. "This is disgusting manipulation. She's literally trying to frame him." We're watching organized crime in action. The smell of rain mixed with the stench of desperation as Brenda realized her live stream had backfired spectacularly. But she was too committed to stop now. 911? "I need police immediately," she screamed into her phone while staring directly at me. "Darren Wolf just threatened to murder my entire family. He's armed and dangerous." What she didn't know was that Sheriff's Deputy Jake Morrison, my Army buddy who'd responded to her previous false reports, was monitoring police radio traffic and growing tired of being weaponized for her personal vendettas. Jake arrived with body cameras rolling and backup units, but instead of approaching me, he walked directly to Brenda with handcuffs ready. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and interfering with federal investigations," he announced, while her live stream continued broadcasting to hundreds of shocked neighbors. The Facebook comments became a real-time celebration. "Finally, justice. About time someone arrested the real criminal. This is better than Netflix." But the federal escalation that followed made local arrests look like parking tickets. While Brenda was being processed at county jail, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at her house, Bradley's dealership, and their various business properties. The search warrants revealed panic-induced stupidity that would make federal prosecutors grin for months. Brenda had been systematically destroying documents while under federal investigation, a separate felony that carries 5-year sentences. Bradley had transferred $890,000 to offshore accounts just days earlier. money laundering charges that trigger asset forfeiture and decades in prison. Most damning was Brenda's own cell phone, which contained recorded conversations about bribing city officials, intimidating witnesses, and using HOA funds for personal vacations. She'd literally documented her own criminal conspiracy while planning to frame me for domestic violence. The irony was delicious enough to taste. Her live stream, intended to provide evidence of my threatening behavior, instead broadcast her own confession to systematic corruption in front of hundreds of witnesses. As federal agents loaded boxes of evidence into unmarked vans, the smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the sweet scent of justice finally being served. Neighbors emerged from houses where they'd hidden for years, watching their tormentor face consequences they'd never dared imagine. Skylar stood beside me as handcuffs clicked around Brenda's wrists under streetlights that reflected off her mascara-streaked tears. "Is it over, Daddy?" she asked, with 12-year-old hope mixed with lingering fear. "The arrests are just beginning, baby girl. But yes, the nightmare is finally over." Election day was still 10 days away, but federal corruption charges had validated everything my campaign promised about fighting systematic abuse and restoring integrity to local government. Election night transformed the county courthouse steps into the kind of scene that makes history books. Over 400 people packed the square under blazing media lights from 3 television stations, 2 documentary crews, and reporters from papers as far away as Cleveland. The autumn air crackled with electricity, not just from the news equipment, but from a community finally tasting justice after years of systematic abuse. The vote results hit like a tsunami of accountability. Sheriff's race? Darren Wolf, 82% of the vote, the largest electoral mandate in county history. Reform candidates swept every contested office, creating a government transformation that would reshape local politics permanently. But as I approached the microphone podium with Skylar beside me, the real fireworks were about to begin. "My fellow citizens," I began, my voice carrying across the square with military authority. "Tonight we didn't just win an election. We ended the largest organized crime operation in Ohio municipal history." I held up the federal indictment that had been unsealed just hours earlier. 247 pages documenting systematic theft that would make mafia accountants weep with envy. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Thornfield Criminal Enterprise. $6.2 million stolen from 8 communities, laundered through 17 shell companies, and used to bribe officials across 3 counties. The crowd erupted, but I wasn't finished. The mic drop moment was still coming. "But here's what federal prosecutors discovered this morning that even I didn't know," I continued, pulling out a document that made my hands shake with rage. Brenda Thornfield and her network weren't just stealing HOA money. They were systematically targeting military families, elderly residents, and single parents for enhanced harassment because we were statistically less likely to fight back. Dead silence. Then a roar of fury that could be heard in the next county. The demographic targeting wasn't random. It was calculated predation designed to maximize theft while minimizing resistance. Military families who moved frequently, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and single parents too busy working multiple jobs to attend board meetings. They'd weaponized vulnerability for profit. That's when the evening's surprise guest arrived. Federal prosecutor Amanda Remy stepped to the microphone with the kind of presence that makes courtrooms fall silent. "Citizens of this county, I'm here to announce that Operation Clean Sweep has just concluded with the arrests of 23 individuals for RICO conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, and civil rights violations." Live arrests were happening simultaneously across the county as she spoke. Bradley Thornfield, arrested at his dealership while trying to flee with $890,000 in cash. City Finance Director Robert Mills, handcuffed during dinner at the country club. 3 city council members taken into custody at their victory parties for uncontested races they'd bought with stolen money. But the moment that sent the crowd into absolute pandemonium came when federal agents escorted Brenda Thornfield herself onto the courthouse steps in orange jumpsuit and shackles. "Mrs. Thornfield has requested to make a public statement," Prosecutor Remy announced with barely concealed satisfaction. Brenda approached the microphone like a woman walking to her execution, her perfect makeup replaced by federal custody reality. The smell of her vanilla perfume had been replaced by institutional soap and the stench of defeat. I want to apologize to every family we hurt," she began, her voice breaking as hundreds of victims stared at their tormentor in chains. "We started with small shortcuts and it became something evil that destroyed everything we touched. The crowd's response was biblical. Not cheering, but a low rumble of vindicated rage from people who'd been powerless for years watching their community money fund corruption. But Skylar delivered the night's most devastating moment when she stepped to the microphone with 12-year-old fearlessness. "Ah, Mrs. Thornfield," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "You made my daddy sad. You scared our neighbors, and you stole money from kids like me. But you taught us something important. Bad people only win when good people stay quiet." The standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. Veterans saluted, elderly residents wept, parents lifted children on their shoulders so they could witness democracy defeating organized crime through citizen participation. As federal agents led Brenda away to face decades in prison, she looked back at the crowd with something that might have been regret. Too late for forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding the devastation she'd caused. The documentary cameras captured everything: the arrests, the confessions, the community catharsis that would inspire similar investigations nationwide. This wasn't just local news anymore. It was a model for how citizens can reclaim democracy from systematic corruption. As media lights finally dimmed and crowds dispersed into the night, the courthouse steps had become hallowed ground where a community proved that organized crime is no match for organized citizens willing to fight for justice. The smell of autumn leaves mixed with the sweet scent of victory as families walked home to a community finally free from the corruption that had stolen their money and terrorized their democracy. 6 months later, the smell of Ruth's blooming roses mixed with fresh coffee and children's laughter as Willowbrook Estates transformed into the community my grandmother had always envisioned. What was once a neighborhood terrorized by corruption had become a model of democratic governance that attracted delegations from across the country. The new HOA board, elected unanimously after Brenda's downfall, had slashed monthly fees from $340 to $187 while actually improving services through legitimate competitive bidding. The savings-funded improvements residents actually wanted: a playground where Skylar taught younger kids about fairness, walking trails that connected isolated seniors with protective neighbors, and a community garden that produced fresh vegetables for families struggling with grocery costs. My sheriff's department became a national model for community-oriented law enforcement. Property crime plummeted 58% through neighborhood watch programs that turned strangers into protectors. Veterans' unemployment disappeared entirely after implementing hiring preferences that valued military service. Mental health crisis intervention teams reduced incarceration while connecting people with real help instead of criminal records. But the transformation I'm proudest of happened around our kitchen table. Skylar had blossomed from a scared kid hiding from neighborhood bullies into a confident young leader who'd started democracy detectives at her school, teaching fifth graders how to research local government and spot corruption warning signs. She'd been featured in national news as the 12-year-old who helped expose organized crime, and used her platform to encourage other kids to pay attention to adult decisions that affect their futures. The legal victory exceeded our wildest hopes. Federal prosecutors secured convictions against all 27 defendants with sentences that sent shockwaves through corrupt networks nationwide. Bradley received 28 years for RICO conspiracy. Brenda got 18 years after cooperating to expose similar schemes in 15 other states. Asset forfeiture recovered $8.1 million, providing full victim restitution plus damages for years of systematic abuse. The community healing that followed proved more valuable than any monetary recovery. Our annual Ruth Wolf Community Festival drew 4,000 visitors last month, celebrating the diversity and cooperation that corruption had tried to destroy. Gladys Remy, now serving as honorary festival grandmother, had created something beautiful from the ashes of systematic abuse, proving that communities can emerge stronger after defeating organized crime. Marcus Rivera's city council victory led to transparent budgeting that saved taxpayers $2.8 million in year one. Sarah Martinez revolutionized county financial oversight, creating audit systems that prevented fraud before it started. Dr. Walsh's senior advocacy network protected elderly residents statewide from predatory HOA schemes, using our investigation methods to identify and stop corruption early. The ripple effects reached far beyond Ohio. The Willowbrook reforms, state legislation requiring HOA transparency and competitive bidding, passed in 42 states and became federal policy for communities receiving government funding. Our investigation techniques were adopted by FBI task forces dismantling municipal corruption networks from coast to coast. Professional recognition brought opportunities that secured our family's future. Speaking engagements about grassroots anti-corruption efforts funded Skylar's college savings. Documentary rights and book deals ensured our story would inspire others facing similar battles. But the letters from families we'd never met provided the deepest satisfaction. A military family in Texas had used our methods to expose $4.3 million in HOA theft. Single mothers in Florida stopped predatory board harassment by documenting discrimination patterns we'd identified. Elderly residents in California prevented systematic abuse by recognizing warning signs we'd publicized. Your courage gave us hope when we felt powerless, one grandmother wrote. Now our community is safe, and our grandchildren can grow up somewhere that values fairness over favoritism. Reading testimonials like these while sitting in Ruth's restored garden, surrounded by roses that now symbolized community resilience instead of individual loss, I understood that this journey had achieved something greater than personal justice. We'd proven that ordinary citizens can defeat organized corruption through courage, documentation, and democratic participation. The letter that arrived yesterday confirmed our lasting impact. A congressional committee studying municipal fraud had requested testimony about citizen-led investigations. Our small-town fight against HOA tyranny was becoming national policy for protecting communities from systematic abuse. As Schuyler practices her upcoming speech to the Congressional Oversight Committee, I'm reminded daily that democracy's greatest victories come when good people refuse to stay silent while corruption threatens their children's futures. Drop your craziest HOA nightmare story below. We read every single comment, and the wildest ones get featured in future Karen Stories videos. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because next week we're diving into how a power-hungry PTA president tried to embezzle the school carnival funds, and the kindergarten teacher who brought her down with receipts that'll make you cheer.